All right, let's get started. So today we have Felix Agyemang, who will be presenting on some of his work modeling and simulating informal urbanization. Felix holds a PhD in land economy from the University of Cambridge, and he currently is a postdoc at the University of Bristol. Prior to that, Felix also completed a Bachelor's of Science degree in spatial planning at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. Felix significantly contributed to the formulation of the National Spatial Development Framework for Ghana, as well as the spatial development frameworks for the Ashanti region and the Northern Ecological Zone of the West African country. Currently, Felix is working on two research projects at the University of Bristol, both relating to urban dynamics and the global South. So thank you very much, and please give a warm welcome to Felix. Before we get started, I'd like to call your attention to the question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit questions throughout the talk, and we'll be able to answer them at the end. So please do remember to submit questions during the talk through the question and answer feature. Awesome. So now I'll stop screen sharing, and Felix, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Levi. I'm sharing my screen with you. Thank you once again, and good afternoon to you all. I'm Felix Agyemang, as Levi introduced me. I'm with the University of Bristol, and today I'll be talking about modeling and simulating informal urbanization. More precisely, I would introduce an urban model that simulates residential growth in a developing city in Africa. I've been working alongside Professor Elizabeth Silva at the University of Cambridge and Dr. Sean Fox at the University of Bristol. A little bit of context here. Today, we live in an urban world, and the future of urbanization is pretty much Africa and Asia, as the two continents are projected to absorb about 90% of the expected 2.5 billion additional urban dwellers over the next 3 decades. Managing this urbanization is going to be a daunting challenge, even more so when we consider the challenges that engulf developing cities. For instance, urban poverty, environmental degradation, health decline, and many others. Now, further exacerbating this challenge of managing the expected urban boom is the predominantly informal nature of the urbanization that characterizes many cities in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, talking about the informal nature of urbanization, we're talking about two specific features, or two key features. One being the phenomenon where a significant proportion of development is undertaken by households through a self-build process, often navigating a very complex and ambiguous property rights regime. And two, an instance where majority of development occur without planning permit. In fact, there are examples of these dotted across the sub-region, from Ghana to Nigeria, South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, Namibia, Kenya. There are a whole lot of examples of these being expressed in the sub-region and many more. Now, despite the scale of this informal urbanization, it's received minimal attention by scholars within the geospatial science, specifically when it comes to urban modeling. Now, the few attempts that have been made at modeling informal urbanization in sub-Saharan Africa reflects the general evolution of geospatial modeling techniques. Since Lee's publication in 1973, which many actually have argued that publication sought to bury large-scale urban models, the approaches of modeling the urban system has evolved from static top-down techniques that requires rigid assumptions of equilibrium, which rarely exist within urban systems, to one that are more bottom-up and dynamic. Now, this evolution has been occasioned by advances in technological development, also in theory formulation, and of course, increasing availability of data. Now, cellular automata, it's one of the approaches that has evolved. and it has seen significant applications in other areas, and also with modeling of informal cities in sub-Saharan Africa. In the next slide, I will talk about some of the attempts that have been made by using CA to model informal growth in sub-Saharan Africa. Cellular automators appeal. It's not hard really to see. It's quite clear from simple local interactions that are governed by simple transition rules. A complex and emergent order can be simulated. Another technique which has also evolved and has seen quite a popular, has been popular in the geospatial modeling community is agent-based modeling. It is based on the understanding that abstracting the constituent or the agents that are responsible for change of a system, understanding their behavior and their interrelationships and modeling them, it's a better way of basically modeling systems. It's also seen a significant application, which I will show you examples of. So talking about CA, CA has been applied, as I said, in several instances in Africa in modeling informal urbanization. A key publication is the one in Lagos by Badmos et al., which is quite recent. They integrated a logistic regression model with a cellular automata to model slum growth in Lagos. Okuashi et al. Also modeled land use changes in Lagos in 2012. We've also had instances of applications in Nairobi, where Mubia and Menz simulated urban growth. In Yaoundé, Saint Chimping specifically modeled informal settlement growth using cellular automata technique. And in Cape Town, Watkins modeled or simulated urban expansion using cellular automata technique. And of course, there's also an application in Accra, where Agyemang et al. Simulated urban growth within the city. Now, I should mention that in all of these, in most of these instances, SLUT model, what is the most popular cellular automata model, was used. SLUT was developed in 1997 by Clark et al. And it's been quite popular, as I've mentioned earlier on. Its popularity partly stems from its simplicity. It has 4 main growth rules: edge growth, spontaneous growth, new spreading centers, and road gravity. And based on these simple, spatially explicit rules, you could simulate an entire or a complex urban system. So hence its appeal. Now, despite SLUT being simple and having several advantages, SLUT, like other cellular automata modeling techniques, has its own weaknesses. Now, one of the weaknesses is that it's not able to directly model the social processes that generate the change that we observe. So for instance, you don't have human agents in SLUT and in many cellular automata modeling techniques. So you don't have autonomous human agents or decision-making agents in these models. And for us to be able to improve our ability of abstracting the urban system, we will need models that directly integrate or account for these social processes that result in the change that we observe in space. Now, so that is with cellular automata. Now, the other technique that I mentioned about, that I talked about earlier, agent-based modeling, I've also seen several or few applications, actually, I should say, in sub-Saharan Africa. A key publication is by Augustin Beckers, where they simulated housing growth in a slum area in Dar es Salaam. They had 2 main agents, property owners and then renters, and they combine the agents' interactional behavior with 3 main growth rules: infilling, expansion, and one other one, to simulate slum housing growth in the slum area. However, it should be mentioned that the area that was considered, it's actually just a neighborhood, one neighborhood of the entire city of Dar es Salaam. So Dar es Salaam is estimated in terms of population to be about 4.3 million. And the area that was simulated is less than 100,000. And that notwithstanding, the results for applying the approach is quite promising. Another weakness of this particular publication is that it only simulates the emergence, sorry, the expansion of an existing slum. So if you take the city context or the city region context, it doesn't have room for the emergence of new informal settlement or clusters. This publication, which was focused on Ghana in the western region of Ghana by Nkrumah, is also quite key. They used agent-based modeling as well to simulate spatial group patterns in Shamar, which is actually a small town in the western region of Ghana. And in doing so, they actually simulated the self-build processes as well. So that is quite promising that they applied agent-based modeling to that phenomenon. However, their model is yet to be applied to a city scale or to a city region context. And the model does not also account for the legal status of land changes. So you cannot tell whether the development that has occurred is, say, formal or informal. Again, the model does not account for the critical role that governments play in various contexts, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And also the model, it's not validated beyond visual inspection. Yes, the human eye is powerful in so many ways, but being able to use a model, or policymakers relying on a model, modelers would have to go beyond visual inspection in validating their model to include more quantitative evidence. And this particular model does not go beyond the validation, the visual inspection validation technique. Another attempt of applying agent-based modeling to informal settlement or informal urbanization is the attempt by Patel et al., where they actually simulated the emergence of slum in a stylized environment. The model is yet to be applied to a real-world sub-Saharan African city. So with this review, there are several gaps that we have observed, and two of them are, one, the absence of models that simulate the informal urbanization process whereby households can self-build, often without planning permission, and two, the absence of models that are applied and validated. I mean, validation here is very key, and validated at a city or city region scale in sub-Saharan Africa. So against this backdrop, we present to you TI City, which is the short form of the informal city, the name of the model that we've developed. Now, it's a model that leverages on the strengths of cellular automata and agent-based modeling techniques to, one, predict the locations, two, the legal status, and three, the economic status of future residential development in a sub-Saharan African city. Now, this is the model framework. In the model, we have three main agents. One, we have households. Now, households are further stratified by income into low, middle, and high income households. Then we have real estate developers. And real estate developers are further stratified by those that provide for the mid-end market and those that target the high-end market. Then we have government as the third agent. Now let's explore this framework a little bit with this conceptual diagram. So we have households, we have real estate developers, and we have land parcels. Now the land parcels, each parcel has an attribute or a characteristic, right? For instance, say the built-up status of the land, whether it is developed or not developed, the price of the land, proximity to amenities, the slope or the physical characteristics of the land, and many others. So, I mean, these are just examples. We'll explore the attributes of the land that we've used quite shortly. Now, households, unlike in many other models, in this model, households are able to develop via the self-build processes that we've mentioned earlier on, and real estate developers to develop. Then you have the government agent that sits on top of them. And the government agent here is to regulate development or the development control and function that typically governments play all over the world, including sub-Saharan Africa. For a parcel to be developed, this is a conceptual diagram once again, or conceptual function as to how development can occur on a parcel. So let's say agent A would select location I. That is a function of the physical suitability at location J. Okay, agent I will select location J. That would depend on the physical suitability of location J. That in itself would also depend on the slope at location J and the exclusion status of location J. So here, exclusion, we're talking about lands that are physically excluded from development. So there could be forest reserves that are protected, wetlands that are protected, water areas, ecologically sensitive areas that are protected, areas that are not physically basically available for development. That is what we consider as exclusion here. Now, it also depends on the affordability, right? And affordability is also a function of the income of agent I and the land price as location J. It is also a function of the proximity to amenities, utility here is a function of proximity to amenities and infrastructure. And the last parameter here is development control, which is also a function of, which is based on the laws and regulations that govern physical development in a particular context. Now, agents behave in the model, and their behavior is regulated. Now, in regulating the behavior of the model, we assume that the agents do not have perfect information. Rather, they have limited information. So the agents are assumed to be boundedly rational. And as such, they do not necessarily maximize utility. They rather satisfy utility. So they would go to one of the parcels, or a parcel that has a generally high, very high utility, not necessarily the highest utility. So we use the satisficing instead of the maximizing criteria. Then we follow a process using decision tree for agents to settle in the market. Now, so this is how the process works. An agent would first ask, is the land vacant? If the land is not vacant, the agent will consider another parcel. If the land is vacant, the agent will proceed to ask, is the land physically suitable for development? If not, the agent will consider another parcel. If yes, the agent will ask, is the land affordable? If not, would consider another parcel. If it is affordable, the agent would ask, is the land satisfying in terms of its utility, as I explained earlier on? If not, the agent will consider another parcel. And if yes, the parcel will be selected by the agent. Now, I mentioned utility in the previous slide. That is the final question that the agent asked, that is the utility satisfying? And if yes, the agent selects the parcel. If not, we'll consider another parcel. Now, in our model, the utility is regulated with this equation. And I want you to pay particular attention to W, right? So Y is basically the value that the value of a factor. So here, the factor here is the spatial proximity factors, for instance, that I've talked about, proximity to amenities, and other spatial and specific factors that we've considered. And critically, W, which is the weight that a particular agent associates with the factor. Now, we've introduced that weight to account for, in real world, how different agents assign different priorities to a factor. Now, it's also worth mentioning that we've treated utility in a dynamic way, not in a static way. And this is what I mean by treating utility in a dynamic way. So assume you have these parcels and pay attention to parcel Q. This is parcel Q, and parcel Q has 8 neighbors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's say at time T1, parcel Q is not attractive to low-income households, or has no utility for low-income households. And then its surrounding neighbors, 1, 5, 7, are generally attractive to low-income households, right? So in time 2, parcel 157 gets selected for development by a low-income household. Now, what happens is that at time T2, parcel Q would update its status based on what has happened at its neighborhood. Because 3 of its neighbors have been selected by low-income households, parcel Q, which was initially or formally not attractive to low-income households, then update its status to become attractive to low-income households. So it will be available for high consideration by low-income households agents that enter the market. So once again, utility is dynamic, not rigid or static. Then there's a development control parameter, which we've mentioned, that accounts for the role that governments play in development. Now, it tells us the extent to which the agents would abide by land use plans and zoning plans, and also planning permit requirements, for instance, the land title registration and other requirements that exist. To account for this, we've introduced a parameter called development control parameter. And the value of that parameter ranges from 0 to 100. If the value is 0, it means that lands that are not zoned as residential, that are not unplanned, or lands that are not titled would be available in the market. I mean, 0 means it's free for all. Basically, there is no development controls. Everybody can do, every agent can do what they like. So lands that would have otherwise not been available for development will be available for development, like will be available for consideration or will be available in the market for the agents to consider. Whereas 100 means these same lands are excluded from the market. So they are not available in the market for consideration. Now, 100 means there is absolute control by the government. So the laws strictly apply. If a land is not zoned for residential development, cannot be developed. If a land is not titled, permit cannot be secured. If a land is not planned, permit cannot be secured, and hence development cannot apply. Yeah. If any development happens on any of these 3 lands, that development is then classified as informal. So having demonstrated the framework of the model, we demonstrate the utility of this model by applying it to Accra. So Accra is the capital of Ghana, and it's one of the fastest growing cities in West Africa, and it's very populous and very big in the context of West Africa and also Ghana. It occupies just about 3.4% of Ghana's landmass. However, it accounts for more than 1/5 of Ghana's population, and it absorbs more than 1/4 of Ghana's GDP, despite accounting for less than 5% of the landmass. We acquired data in calibrating or in applying the model to Accra. One of the key data we acquired was through household survey, which is basically to understand how different agents prioritize various location choice factors. So we conducted a household survey involving 800 households in Accra city region. We also got data on land values from Ghana Lands Commission. We also got data from land title registration status from Ghana Lands Commission, and also the TCPD, which is now Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority, LUSPA. And we also got structure plans from the TCPD as well, and then a whole lot of other data set from Ghana. So we process these data sets, we standardize the spatial factors basically to 0 to 1 for computational efficiency. So all these are normalized factors. And this is the map showing the normalized factors from 0 to 1, where 0 means close proximity and 1 means the area is distant from the amenity in question. And this is the weight that we've processed. This is the data processed, the weight that various households, Indian households, assigned to the factors that we identified to be relevant. So for instance, low-income households assign higher weight to proximity to roads and urban centers than high-income households and low-income households. So having acquired this data, we go through this process. We calibrate the model, TICT for Accra, and we also calibrate SLUT, which I mentioned earlier on, that is the most popular CA model that has been applied globally, and also within the context of modeling informal urbanization in sub-Saharan Africa. We calibrate SLUT, and this is because we want to be able to validate our model, compare its strength with SLUT, which we'll get there shortly, and then see more about that. So we predict urban growth using city from 2000 to, using TICT from 2000 to 2010, and we do the same with SLUT. Then we compare what we have predicted with TICT to what actually occurred, they observed. We do same for SLUT. Then finally, we compare the performance of our model to that of SLUT. Now, in parameterizing our model, we benchmarked the household population, the household number in the model, on the population census. So we expected that between 2000 and 2010, based on the population census for 2010 and 2000, we expected about 425,000 households to be seeking for land. And we're also minded by the fact that the model we're developing should be usable in the context for which it's being developed. It shouldn't only be usable as its resource requirement, shouldn't only make it usable in few contexts or in few labs that have high computational capacity. Now, simulating 420,000 households in the model requires huge computational resources, which is hardly or rarely available in the context for which the model is developed. So we scaled up the resolution of the city a little bit, and that scale would also apply to the households. So we ended up simulating 8,395. That represents the same 425,000 households. Then the income classification was based on, once again, the census and Ghana Living Standard Survey report. We also spoke to the Ghana Real Estate Developers Association, and based on that, we arrived at a number of 160 for real estate developers, which we further classified into 70% those that target mid-end and 30 those that target high-end market. The development control parameter we use is 10, and that is based on the Ghana housing profile that basically estimated about 90% of basically development or care without planning permission. So here, 10% means about 90% of development or of lands that are otherwise non-legal could be available randomly. 90% will be selected and could be available for consideration by the agents in the market. Then slope, we use 11, and that is based on the calibration of SLUT, which I'm coming to talk about. So with SLUT has, I mean, those of you that know SLUT has 5 main parameters that control how development occur. It has the dispersion parameter, which based on the brute force calibration undertaken by Agyemang et al. For the same period and for the same area, we settled on these parameters: 76, 33, 95, 11, road gravity 10, and critical slope 25. So having calibrated or having parameterized TICT for Accra, this is the prediction that we got for 2010. I mean, generally, so the red areas are the areas that we predicted correctly. So we predicted, and you could also observe developments there. And you could see generally it reflects the structure or the patterns that occurred. Well, there were a few areas that we've predicted and other areas that we under-predicted. Now, interestingly, the areas that we seem to have over-predicted are areas that, upon inspection from Google Earth map, development did occur from 2012 to 2015. So even though by 2010, development did not occur, so hence would appear like our prediction was wrong there. Development eventually occurred just a couple of years later. So, temporarily, we're just wrong by say 2 years, 2 to 5 years. Then we did same for SLUT. So here we've just opposed what SLUT did for the same period and what TICT did. And just by visual inspection, you could see that when it comes to inner city development, right? So the inner city, both TI and SLUT seems to perform creditably well. However, when you consider peri-urban development, that is where SLUT seems to fall short. I mean, at this point, visually, you can see these clusters that TICT picks quite well, but SLUT isn't able to pick the peri-urban development quite well. I mean, whilst once again, the human eye is powerful in so many ways, we can't just rely on that. We have to move a step further to provide quantitative evidence supporting this. And that is what we do. So we adopt a novel approach in validating the performance of the models. So we validate the performance of the models at different spatial scales. And this is because in real world, interventions are implemented at different spatial scales. So what we do is we overlay grids of different resolutions. And at each resolution and for each grid, we calculate the percent area, the percentage of the area of the grid that is predicted to be developed by each of the model. Then we compare that to the percent of the area that was observed as developed. And then we treat it as a regression problem. So this is what we do, for instance. We apply, say, 1 kilometer grid. Then for each cell within the grid, we calculate the proportion of the area that is predicted as developed and the proportion of the area that is observed as developed. Okay, so we do that for TICT and for SLUT as well. Then we overlay a bigger grid, say 5 kilometer in this example, and we do same. So then we treat it as a regression problem by calculating the R squared between predicted and observed for TICT and same for SLUT. And this is the results emanating from that validation process. I mean, you could see that at all spatial resolutions, from 1 kilometer to 6.5 kilometer, our model TICT considerably outperforms SLUT. And we've shown examples of the scatter plot for the 2.5 kilometer grid and 5 kilometer grid. If you recall, I mentioned earlier on that one of the objectives of our model is to be able to predict the income status as well as the legal status of development that have occurred. And we did that. So this is the income basically distribution that we predict occurred between 2000 and 2010. However, at this point, we don't have data to be able to validate this, but we've presented this to demonstrate that TICT is able to predict this, the income parameter or the income status as well. As and when we get data, we'll be able to factor that and then validate the income predictions of TICT, likewise the legal status predictions that comes out of TICT. So this is something that is extra that TICT gives you that SLUT doesn't provide at all. So based on the strong performance of TICT, we apply it to future predictions, and we've predicted development up to 2030. Well, should I say that we'll be back in the next 10 years to see how right we were. Now for 2030 predictions too, we have the income status version, and as you can see, we disclaimer making the patterns that we observe in many cities, especially in sub-Saharan Africa as well. We can see concentration of low income, middle income households. So you see in basically economic clustering or income clustering. And we also have the version that predict the legal status of the If you can do a quick visual comparison, you would realize that the areas that the high income households are settling tend to be quite formal, are predicted to be formal. And the areas that low income households are settling are predicted to be informal. This is just visual inspection. Now let's dig a little bit deeper with a slide where we look at the numbers in the form of plot. Now there are so many things we see from this plot. One of them is that generally, majority of development is predicted to be informal. Okay, you're talking about more than 60% of development are predicted to be informal by 2030. Low income households development will be increasing in its informality. Likewise, middle income and then high income will be decreasing. Now observe this. Now from initially, what happens is the majority of high income households go to those informal lands that are uniquely high in their utility, but then after a few years, they quickly go to the formal lands because they've already exhausted the informal lands that are uniquely high in terms of their attraction. Then they proceed more to the formal lands. So the rate at which they develop on informal lands declines. So look at the gap between high income households and low income households at 2030. That is a huge gap. Now, what this is telling us is that income is playing a huge role here, that people that have less income are increasingly getting less secured, whereas people with higher income are increasingly getting more secured. So in the discussion of tenure security, income has to play a huge role. Whatever interventions of tenure security or tenure measures, that does not factor income would end up, so for instance, if you have plans that say increases the security by way of planning for areas that are unplanned, zoning areas as residential, and ensuring that areas are titled, what will happen is that this 45% of high income households, or what is likely to happen is that this 45% of high income households that are still on informal lands are likely to outcompete the low income households, move to the secure lands, and further push the low income households to unsecure lands. So you're going to have high income or urban inequality, even in the expression of security of development. Then we also observe the patterns that are the spatial patterns that are predicted by the model. And what we see is that increasingly edge growth will be declining through 2020, 2030, whereas new centers will be emerging. So by 2027, we expect that the rate at which new centers emerge will be higher than the rate at which edge growth decline. So these new centers have to be catered for in terms of provision of utility and amenity. So this is a dynamic that has to be paid attention to critically by policymakers. There are, of course, limitations with the model. We're not able to do everything. One of the things that we're not able to do is to model residential relocation or densification. We don't have enough information or enough data about the dynamics of residential relocation within the context, and also densification, where people basically just increase the height of existing buildings, so increase the story, don't necessarily expand the built-up area. We're not able to model that because we don't have adequate information to be able to do so. And the model assistance now does not account for the instances where households consume more than one parcel. So there are instances where households consume multiple parcels. We also don't have enough information about that dynamic. So we're not able to introduce that into the model at this stage. We also don't model some of the factors that potentially affect location choice decisions like age, family size, ethnicity, religion. These are not yet accounted for in our model. And then there are other instances where you could have informal development occur on formal lands, and those are normally instances of corruption and bureaucracy. You also don't have enough information of that dynamic to be able to model it. And it should be said that all these limitations also apply to sleuth, that sleuth does not do any of these. So in conclusion, we've seen that existing approaches like cellular automata model is not well suited in modeling the actual social processes that generate the change that we observe. We have applied TICT, which is developed by integrating cellular automata and agent-based modeling, and it's been parameterized with local data we've collected, and we've applied that to Accra. Now, the results from the model application, as we've seen, shows that TICT considerably performs better than sleuth in its predictions. And we also predicting a large proportion of development to be characterized by informal urbanization, or to be informal by 2030. And of course, there is further research, always more work can be done in exploring how the model could be calibrated or could be transferred to similar contexts, similar countries, and similar cities. Thank you very much for your time.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Felix. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So we have a couple of questions. There's one in the chat currently and one in the Q&A, and I'm sure that as we talk a little bit about your presentation, more questions will come up. So the first one that I'd like to, if you can stop screen sharing now, I think then
okay.
we can talk in the round in the gallery. Awesome, great, cool.
Right.
So the first question that I'd like to ask comes from Iman Zeed, which they ask, thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. They want to know if your model has the potential to be used for other types of spatial analysis, like assessments of the future of mobility or street network or transport analysis. Do you see it sort of being able to integrate in other models about infrastructure and urban land use change or urban upgrading? So they're kind of interested in that. Thanks.
Yes, and thank you very much, Iman. Yes, there is the potential for the model to be integrated with other models, especially the platform that was built on, which is a network, and the approach of agent-based modeling is quite flexible. That is one of the strengths of agent-based modeling, that you're able to integrate it with other approaches fairly not in a complicated way. But as it stands now, the model simulates residential growth, which in terms of policy impact has implications for transport, connecting transport networks to areas predicted to be developed. So yes, in a snapshot, yes, there is that potential for the model to be further developed and to be integrated with other models on transport and land use change.
Awesome, great, thanks. We also have a question from Catherine Thomas in the chat, who asks sort of about the interplay between these kinds of agent-based models in general and probably the TI-City model in particular, about sort of demographic factors in the model. Do you think that there's any way that you might model ethnically heterogeneous agents that maybe have different ethnicity functions or ethnic utility functions? How do you think that'll inform policy development?
That is crucial. If we get to that point, it's all about data though. Having enough data to be able to calibrate the model for that diverse agent. So the more strata you introduce, the more diverse the agents are, and the more data you require to be able to calibrate for each agent class. So yes, the model as it stands now, in terms of the procedure we've used, it wouldn't be too difficult introducing more agents as long as the data is available. So as and when we get more data, we'll be able to expand the characteristics of the agents that have been considered as of now.
Neat. I had a question about sort of the results that you were presenting on the TI-City and the sleuth comparisons. It's really striking to me that there's such a, I would say, significant difference in the morphology predicted by the two models. As you noted, the TI city model predicts way better on the urban periphery, and they both kind of do infill okay. What specifically do you think it is about the TI city structure that gives you those morphologically different predictions? Is it the sort of dynamic updating you have with the utility, where sort of people kind of, there's this contagious utility, or have you thought about that? And what do you think?
Yes, I think for now I can put a term on two main things. So one of them is how dynamically utility is updated. It is not held constant or rigid. The other is the spatial factors that even go into utility that we're able to account for. So proximity to that SLUD isn't able to account for. So for instance, some urban centers that have emerged that are mostly close to the peripheries, they are new suburban centers that have emerged. SLUD isn't able to account for that, and TICT accounts for that. So that attraction that comes with it, which then spills development into the peri-urban areas, TICT is able to model that. Whereas in the case of SLUD, beyond the four growth rules, you're not able to account for these geographical characteristics in terms of the amenities and infrastructure that inform people's choices.
Nice. So we have another question from the audience, from Simon Peter Rocha, who asks about the TI-city model being sort of modified by taking economic development into account over a longer period of time, as it may have an effect on the emergence of informal residential areas. In a similar fashion, could political aspects be integrated into the model?
Yes, thank you very much, Simon. So the simulation we've done for 2030 is the trend scenario, or the business as usual scenario, that if the population continues to develop the same way, if economic circumstances proceed at the same growth, this is what will happen. Yes, you could also simulate scenarios, or different scenarios, that what if the proportion of low-income households decreases, and then now you have more high-income households, as in if you have economic development that increases the income of households. Yes, you can calibrate that as it stands now and see what patterns come out of it. For instance, if government implement policies that leads to better control or better regulation of development, we can also change the development control parameter and see what patterns emerge from that. So yes, that is the whole purpose of developing this tool, that you can calibrate it to suit different economic and, say, political scenarios. Yeah, so there is that bit that the model can do. But for now, the simulations are based on the trend scenario.
Yeah, and that's also one time period too, right? So there's the longer term. Obviously, you need more data as well, I assume.
Yep. The longer term, we need more data.
Cool. Yeah. One quick question from Tiago would be that how did you come to choose health and education facilities as part of the model governing individual agent utility?
So we collected data, and then we did logistic analysis of the data that we collected to basically extract the factors that are significant, and then looked at the scores, as in the weights that the agents, that the people assigned to those factors. So it was via a logistic regression analysis based on the household survey that we conducted.
Awesome, great, thanks. We don't have any more questions in the Q&A, but if Rachel would like to ask a question.
I have a couple of questions if we've got the time. I think we do, and maybe others will drop their questions into the Q&A. But I was thinking about the question about demography, which of course is tricky when we think about ethnicity, or as you include income or other characteristics of individuals. But another interesting aspect of individuals that is demographic is sort of demographic behavior and household structures. So when people form households and they have children, that of course plays out very importantly spatially, because you have demand for services. And so I wonder how you think about that, because it sort of would reflect or determine sort of changing distribution of population within a city, along with the characteristics of those households.
Yes, I agree with you, Rahel, that household structure, presence of children are key factors. So for instance, you could think of a situation where households with children will prioritize location to school compared to, say, households without children. As it stands now, we don't have enough data to be able to increase the diversity of the household agents beyond income, but it is a critical factor that going forward, we would like to be able to integrate into the model as and when we have more data to be able to do that.
I mean, it's interesting to think about the countries and cultures where demographic behavior and spatial location are tightly linked and where they're less linked. So for example, in the US, where they're very tightly linked, you know, when you marry, typically a move comes before or after. When you have children, often there is a move that comes before or after. When you retire from work, there's often a move. So that the geography and the behavior of where people locate themselves on the landscape is very closely tied. But I imagine that that isn't necessarily the case for all places in the world.
Yep. I agree with you that in applying the model to any context, understanding the geography, you know, the dynamics between geography and household structure or family structure is very important.
Yeah.
So it's certainly no one size fits all. The local dynamics has to be taken into consideration in applying the model. Even when we get to the point of being able to integrate household structure, its application will not be rigid across board. It has to take into consideration the context within which it's being applied to. So I agree with you, and thank you very much, Rachel.
Yeah, and so just one other question, I'll take the liberty as an organizer. You talked a little bit about validation, but I probably missed this, and this isn't my area of research, but your validation, you're able to see if a parcel was developed and when over a given time period, but can you tell what types of household in terms of income developed those parcels? I suppose you would need the data for that.
Yes, we can. Yes, I mean, we can tell. TICT is able to tell, but in terms of the ground development as to what has been observed, whether indeed the household that live on the parcel is high income, low income, or middle income, that is the data that we're missing, that we don't have that layer. But as it stands now, TICT is prediction because we know the income characteristics of the agents that are settled on the parcels. We can tell from the predicted aspect, but we didn't do that income quantitative validation because we don't have the corresponding data from the observed.
Yeah. Great. I can ask more questions, but I think in case the audience has more, in case Levi has more.
No, I think we're about at time at this point, but if we don't have any more from the audience, I think we're good to go. So cool.
Thank you so much, Felix. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Rahel. Thank you very much, Levi. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining this.
Wonderful.
Thank you to the audience.
And I believe next week we also have a talk, yes?
I do believe so.
So please, please come again at the same time to hear yet another great talk in the series. That one is, I can't find, well, it will be another good talk.
and it will definitely be promoted on Twitter.
Yes.
But yes, we look forward to seeing everyone hopefully next week.
And as always, the talks will be posted to the YouTube channel that was posted earlier in the chat, and I can repost that here just to show everybody. Thank you very much. There you are.
And there was just one last in the Q&A, just one last comment.
Oh, was there? Yes.
Well, just saying thank you very much for this amazing modeling approach. I would love to see the outcome of the Cape Town findings. And that was from Leila McKenna. So thank you.
Next week is Vanessa Brumbastos doing movement analytics with geospatial temporal data. So cool. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you so much, Felix, for your excellent presentation. And I hope to have it online within, a day or two. So great.
All right.
Wonderful.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, folks.